for those of you that don't know, my name's Katie. I'm the creator of this space, Equine Blooming, and I'm here today with a lovely lady that I met last fall out in California. His name is Tista, and Tista is the creator of MindHeartHorse, which is a wonderful online equine platform that deals with R+ and positive reinforcement training. And I've had the chance to meet Tista in person and connect a little bit online and have really enjoyed our conversations, so I thought I'd bring her onto a video format and have a little bit of a longer chat with her just to kind of learn more about her journey with horsemanship and where she is now and how she sees things. Is there anything you want to say about yourself, or I could, yeah.
I don't think you feel bad. My name's pronounced Tista. It's so hard. It's like, no, it's totally okay. It's happened my whole life long, so it's really not a problem.
Yeah, I should have asked.
No, it's totally okay. No, that covers it. Yeah, I'm at MindHeartHorse on Instagram, and I'm launching a website really, really soon, but it's not up yet. So yeah,
that's awesome. And I kind of say, like, when I first started following you and everything, like, I think I see a little bit like from knowing you and everything, knowing the people that you're connected with, of why you chose MindHeartHorse. But I was always curious as to how you kind of settled on that name and why you decided to go with that for your personal platform.
Yeah. When I first got on Instagram and decided to do like a horse account, I signed up as Inquire Equine, and I chose that one because I'm like, that was the stage I was at. I was just inquiring into everything. I really was just soaking up a ton of knowledge and trying to learn as much as I could to kind of unfreeze myself, because I had gotten totally frozen in my horsemanship. And once I kind of got through that process, I changed it to MindHeartHorse because for me, my horsemanship practice like really grounds me in all the other practices of my life. So like my physical like practices, my relation to my body, spiritual practices, like my intellectual pursuits, and like my love. Like they're the great love of my life, you know? So I chose MindHeartHorse. First, I like thought like mind, heart, body horse, or like mind, heart, body, soul horse, but then it was getting too long for Instagram. So I'm just like, okay, the horse can be the soul and the body, and I just add in some mind and heart there, because I do feel like when we're talking about our horsemanship practices, like that's where the space I like to come from the most is, you know, using our minds to like figure out what the science is, and you know, do the homework and think about things a little bit critically. But then also it's like, it's such a practice of love. Like, you know, I think anyone who's really invested in horses for their whole life, I mean, it's hard. It's so hard. And it's the love that keeps us there. So that's why I chose the heart part of it. Cause you know, we're all in it for the love at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be, otherwise you're just going to kind of, you get burnt out. Or, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I mean, I guess I do know people who maybe don't love it anymore, but I think we all loved it at some point or another. And that's the really important
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know you studied literature and whatnot in your undergrad. And so something that, I don't know, I always just, that like kind of runs through my mind whenever I see your handle and whatnot, is just like this intersection of all of these different things, because I don't know what your specialty was with literature and everything, but I'm doing studies with comparative literature, and so it's always like the comparison between like the world, the text, and the critic. And so whenever I see your handle, I always think of like, oh, how like spirituality and emotion and intellect are like all tying in together with our practices with our horses. Yeah.
I'm so glad you get it from that, because that's totally how I feel about it. I didn't have like, well, you know, my focus, I guess, was actually education, because I thought I was going to do teaching. So I was on like a little bit of a teaching track, but I actually started off doing philosophy. I thought I was going to be a philosophy major, and almost went to finish my undergrad in it. And then at the last second was like, nope, just kidding. Like, not for me, which is a pity, because I think that like philosophy, I was drawn to it because it does have a lot of that intersection of a lot of things, and it asks the important questions. But unfortunately, like from my perspective, the way that a lot of philosophy is done kind of in modern academia is it's very dry and argumentative, and it doesn't like actually, like, I don't know, it's not fulfilling the way, or it wasn't for me, the way it was being taught. So I switched to literature because that was fulfilling philosophicily for me. But yeah, unfortunately, like did the teaching tracks, I didn't get to do like a lot of like really get into like the meaty stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of like theory, which actually like now I'm seeing how it's serving me now and thinking about teaching others and their horsemanship and stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah, it definitely did. My education definitely did like push me into seeing how everything connects and to appreciate that, because I do think, and I wish things would connect even more. Like I think, you know, the way like modern education's going, like the separation of STEM from the humanities and stuff, like I think that's a total mistake because we all have a lot to offer to each other. There's actually a lot of overlap.
Yeah,
So yeah,
definitely.
that in horses, it's like so important to me. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. How do you see that playing out, like in your individual, like your day-to-day horsemanship with your Juno and everything, the horses at a little rescue and whatnot?
Um, I spend a lot of time thinking about them. So like reading about them, so that like mindfulness practice of tending to my learning when it comes to horses. Like I'm always learning. I'm always trying to
Mhm.
soak up new information. And then also like being, which I've had a harder time lately, is just sort of like being in my body with them in a way that's like that isn't so in my head. Like that just is more about that like energy with them and like the good feeling, the loving feelings, the connection. Because you really do need that balance. Because what I found is that I've, you know, gone so much into the science that sometimes I get kind of stuck there, and the theory is too much in the front of my mind when I'm working with the horses.
Mhm.
Horses don't fit theory. I mean, like the science is true about them, but
Right.
then you're in real life, like, you know, so finding that balance between what you know and then like what is when you're in the moment, is something I'm still working on, but I think that's kind of a lifelong process.
Yeah, definitely.
um,
I mean, that's a lifelong thing, I feel like.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and it's interesting to me that you brought up like the being and the energy of that, because it's something I've really started to kind of fall into in these last couple of months of just like realizing how much my own energy is a form of communication, both with myself and with my horse, and connecting that to my body and then to my horse's body can be both challenging and really rewarding. It's like one thing we've been playing with lately is like sending our energy backwards, like to have Val, my horse, back up. Like, can I send my energy backwards and does she pick up on that? I feel like there's a really interesting connection there because you're right. It goes against, or it doesn't go against, but it's totally left field from the theory of like of applying pressure or whatever, of like what makes a horse back up versus how you actually might be able to go about doing that.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, and there's still so much I need to learn in this. But I think like, you know, for myself, like I went through the education of like really learning about learning theory
Mhm.
and the different quadrants and how behavior is either reinforced or punished and all of that. And it's not as black and white as it seems. Like even like a lot of scientists in learning theory would say like, yes, they're like the quadrants, but they actually kind of all overlap. Like it's more fluid. It's just we have to teach it this way to help people understand the beginning, and then you start to see it a little differently. And with the science too, something I was talking to someone about recently is that like it's so good to remember that like we are the science. Like the science is describing us, like our reality, you know? So
That's so
like
true.
yeah, so you describing like what's happening in that moment with you and your horse, it's like there could be eventually a way to describe that like scientifically or like in that researched way. I don't think that's necessary, like maybe not, but um it doesn't negate it. Like having, this is like something I've come to lately, like having feeling in your horsemanship and just like going with that a little bit and the flow of it, like that doesn't negate the science of it. You can
Mhm.
like do both, you know, it's not all like you're either like a spiritual like flowy energy, like it's all feel
Right.
as horse trainer, or you're just like it's all science and like click 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 and whatever, you know,
Right.
you can combine them. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I love
yeah.
that. I've been had just been talking or like writing online recently about like the power of and these dialecticals, two things that are seem opposing but can be true at the same time. And so coming at it from like my perspective or whatever of like, this is something we talk about a lot with like body image and stuff. Like, I feel fat and I'm, can still fit into the clothes that I fit into yesterday. And so these ideas of, and so I love that because I feel like that ties in really nicely with this idea of, I understand the science of why my horse does this and I can appreciate the motion behind it, or I can see the energy flow. I think that's a really unique way of looking at it. Um, and it leaves room for a lot more gray area, which I feel like takes the pressure off of both you and the horse, ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I get why people want those strict guidelines, and I think it's needed at a certain point, especially when you're learning something new. Like
Right.
it's very difficult to kind of live in ambiguity. So especially when you're learning something in the beginning, it's super important to like be methodical about it and think through it all and have a plan. Like, you know, even though I'm starting to allow more like flow in sessions and like creativity and stuff, like I still have shaping plans. Like I still have like guidelines that are informed by my research and what I know about training. So that's there, but then like having that foundation like allows me to be more free then, you know, and bring everything kind of into harmony more. Where I think some people get stuck looking at, you know, like the Liberty accounts where everything looks like beautiful and flowy and like, you know, but, and then they go out with their horse and like nothing happens like that.
Right.
And they're just like, why didn't anything happen? You know, or why did they do the opposite thing? And, or the flip side of that is people getting like so into the science that they become afraid to train. Like they're afraid to just go out and train because they're so in their heads about what they're doing and the mechanics of it. And like, oh, I just delivered the food wrong. Like I just ruined that entire session.
Right.
Just,
My timing's off.
yeah, exactly. So I do think it's important to spend the time like really learning about our horses and how they function, you know, just as a species, and then as mammals, how they learn, which is the same way we learn.
Yeah.
And so I think that's so important. But then, yeah, completely like there's room for feeling and, you know, and that kind of connection. And yeah, so.
Yeah, and that definitely seems like, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if the general like equine public would agree with me, but I feel like that's the direction we're moving towards, and I see more and more of that cropping up online, and even in my own, like I work at a country western store, and in some of my own personal relations with like customers and stuff, like I see a lot more of people being a little bit more like, well, but you know, my horse is having an off day, or you know, whatever, like recognizing that, whereas I feel like even like 2 or 3 years ago, it was very focused on the science of it and kind of coming at it from a human perspective rather than a horse perspective. So I know you were recently in Texas at Adele's The Willing Equines Farm. How was that? I'm majorly jealous that you were able to do that. It's awesome.
It was so good. I had such a great time. Yeah, total like surreal moment going to her ranch for the first time and like meeting the horses. I'm like, it's like a celebrity moment, you know? Like cause you know, I've been following Adele for like, I think since like 2016. So yeah, so it's been a while. I've been seeing her journey with her horses and known her through Instagram, and I have a working relationship with her now. So it was just really fun to spend time with her, and oh, all the horses are so great, and her place is just, I mean, she was talking about a client who recently came to take some lessons for her and told her after like what a relief it was to be in an environment where nothing was bad. Like everything about it was set up like for the horses, and all the horses were clearly so happy. And that's how I felt being there, because it's really so rare that like you're in an environment where like it's just it works, like it works so well. All the horses are so happy and healthy, and there's such a good feeling of acceptance. So that was really cool. She's created a really amazing thing there, and really, really interesting to learn from Bex. So
Yeah.
Bex with Positively Together was the one hosting the clinic, and just, oh my gosh, so fantastic. I'm still trying to like get like all the information, process that I learned. And it was a great group too, because we had a lot of people who were pretty new to positive reinforcement training. I got a couple of people who are a little more experienced, and it was in like all age groups too. You know, like the youngest person there was 15. And I won't guess the age of the oldest person there because that's not polite, but but you know, with older women too. So it was really, really cool to just like have such a wide range of people from different backgrounds like coming together and being really supportive and learning. It was great.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like that's the dream. And you were talking about like the space that feels like it's created for the horses and made for the horses. And I immediately thought of, I've kind of moved between 3 different farms in my like weekly life, and there's one farm in particular that immediately came to mind because it has the same feel. It's like the farm exists for the horses, not for the humans. And you could just, like, when you drive onto the property, you immediately sense that. And I just think it adds such a layer. Like, I don't know, if you have two horses on, like, if you have the same horse on two different farms, the farm that's set up for the horses, you're already starting a step ahead, rather than the farm where it's maybe not set up in a way that's conducive for the horses. And so I just feel like it's such a powerful thing. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's so fun for us to be able to see their behavior and them interacting with each other, like the little like I love sitting in my horse's pasture and watching all the little dramas like throughout the herd, and what they choose to do, where they choose to rest, like when do they go get water. It's just they're just so fascinating, like, and beautiful, like just on their own. And it's great to be in those environments. And they're rare though, and I understand why. And I've spent a lot of time in different boarding barns too, that have different levels of like how they manage the horses and what the goal and the focus is of the barn itself. And I understand, like, a lot of people are just kind of doing the best they can, that they don't have a lot of options when it comes to how they keep their horses. So I have a lot of compassion for people who are in those situations.
Definitely.
Because even mine, like the one I'm at now, I love my boarding barn, but it's still not perfect. Like, there's still definitely like little care practices I wish I could change. But yeah, just, it's such like that, really, honestly, like if I wish there could be like one mindset shift in the horse world, is just like that kind of like just being like, but let's design it for them first, and then we'll think about what we need, Yeah.
I think that goes a huge way, because I've come to this more and more recently, but like the whole idea of horses don't need to be ridden. And so if we are going to ride them and we are going to interact with them kind of at all, as something that they don't need, then it's our responsibility to make sure that their needs are being met constantly. And that's such a vital yet underemphasized idea anymore, or more currently.
Right. Yeah. And I've thought about a lot, like how it's, when you think about like the human history, like it's relatively like new to actually see horses as something other than objects for our use. Like that's actually so new. And animals in general too. I mean, animal welfare, and thinking about animals ethically, like that's been a relatively new thing too, just in the terms of the entire human history. For horses, like I've always thought it's just, we couldn't see them, like if to use them the way that we did and to put them through what we did, there was just no way we could have seen them for what they really are, like in those moments, because it would just be too difficult. Like you just like literally probably couldn't see the suffering. So I think like shifting out of that mindset, just sort of like as a community on the whole, is a slow process. And and since horses are used for sport and for recreation, there's still like a significant amount of that there, of seeing them as like, this is an object I pay for, I get a use out of it.
Right.
So it's the whole like another shift into being like, this is an animal in my care that has, is sentient and has a subjective experience. And it, as their caretaker, it's up to me to make sure that they're thriving and experiencing as like little pain and suffering as possible. Like, and that's a lot. Like that's a big mind shift, just culturally, from like horses are transportation and for war and like work, and like to this, whereas like they're companions, they're our friends, they're sentient, they're subjective. Like, yeah, it's a big shift.
Definitely. And I mean, you talk about the timeline of that, and I can remember my own grandfather, who's since passed away, but he would tell me he used to run a hunting outfit out in Colorado, and they used horses as like pack horses and everything to get up and down the trails and whatnot. And he would tell me about his experience training and working with the horses, and it was just it's so different from what I see now. And I know he was someone who really loved and respected horses, but he saw them very much as, this is what I use to do my job, and this is kind of the machinery that I need to do my job and to earn my living to feed my family. And now most of us, if we have horses, we're lucky enough to be in a position where our horses they take our money, they don't earn us money. And I feel like that kind of has contributed to a huge part of the mind shift. But yeah, even in the last several generations.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can shape our conversation a little bit,
Yeah.
you have been posting recently on Instagram about like ethics and how you feel about ethical and I think the word you use was aethical
It's
training.
like not the word.
Yeah, but I totally got what you were going for. I was like, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. And so I was just curious if, and you touched on this a little bit already, but to kind of hear you explain some of that and what's been going through your mind, what kind of brought you to this point. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really inspired by there was some conversation going on about using pure not and don't use this phrase pure positive reinforcement because there really honestly is no such thing.
Right.
But like almost fully positive reinforcement training and like consent based force free or like negative reinforcement training, and it kind of they get pitted against each other as positive reinforcement being like the ethical like choice. That's in people will get very intense saying like like if the horse doesn't have complete and absolute choice, then you're not treating them ethically. That's a very extreme view on one side, and then the other side where people like I'm not saying this well. Basically, just can't. There was a conversation that was happening where people were talking about how positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement can be used and the ethics of that. Just like narrow it down to that. So I was inspired by that because it's hard because language itself is so imprecise. Like I was just being very imprecise, but especially in these kinds of conversations, like language is so imprecise, and ethics like is such a huge undertaking. Like just understanding ethics and studying ethics, I'm just at like a here when I should like want to be like here in my understanding of it and my ability to talk about it. And a lot of people take for granted like what that even means and how we get to an ethical horsemanship practice. But anyway, they were talking about the ethics of positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. And one of my posts was just sort of clarifying that like in and of themselves, like the quadrants of learning theory they're not ethical and they're not ethical. Like it's just like baseline, it's just the way mammals learn, like, and that's it. Where you get the ethics is in how it's applied. So that has so many different factors to it. So my other post, I went into why I do think positive reinforcement tends to be more ethical in application. And the two reasons I found for that is one, that like positive reinforcement, the way that using positive reinforcement, the experience of the learner. So for our horses, when we're using positive reinforcement, it's engaging their seeking system. And negative reinforcement does too, but negative reinforcement engages their seeking system in a way that they're seeking to get away from something.
Right. Whereas
the positive reinforcement engages their seeking system where they're looking to get to something, they want some more of something. It's so that's to me when I'm thinking of like if I want to treat my horse ethically and I want to have an ethical horsemanship practice, which to me means I want to like maximize their welfare and their well-being and minimize their suffering mentally or physically, then I want to have my training based in something that causes good feelings for them. And I don't think like negative reinforcement is de facto unethical in application. And I don't even think that negative reinforcement, like when it's used in very skilled applications and thoughtful applications, is even necessarily creating a really negative mental experience for the horse. I think it can be used in a way where it's like not that big of a deal for them, not causing them too much mental strife, but giving them something to work, like to want and feel good about. It's more ethical. I'm like having such a hard time saying this. Like it's so complicated when you think about it. This is why I have to write about things, because like my brain gets like, what?
All good.
Yeah. So the positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement, it's just that little bit of a difference of a mental state where, I mean, we think about it for ourselves when it's like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but just like basically like, okay, you have to do this work and that's it, just because I told you. And then, or you have to do this work and then I'll pay you. It's like even if it's something we really like I like to do things, but I like them way more when I get paid to do them. So kind of understanding that's a little bit of the mental state of our horses when they're training with us. You know, they're getting paid in positive reinforcement. So it's creating like a better mental state for them. And with the other two quadrants, positive punishment and negative punishment, those I don't find ethical in application most often, usually only in emergency situations, or in just sort of like safety situations, which aren't always necessarily emergencies. So like the times I use positive punishment most often is when I'm like trying to get through a gate with another horse. And if horses are crowding, like ideally in that situation, I would have been able to like train the horses how to be respectful around new horses coming out of the gate, but that's not always the case, like especially if they're not my horses. So that's a time when I will like use like positive punishment. Yeah, exactly. Some people will call that negative reinforcement, but it's really like they're doing the behavior you don't want, and then you're doing something that they don't like. That's positive punishment.
Got it.
So I'll do that, you know, and if for safety reasons too, like if I'm working with a horse that has some aggression issues, like I'm already doing everything I can to set the environment where I'm not putting that horse past their threshold and creating a bad situation. But sometimes it just happens, especially with horses that have had like a lot of trauma. They can go like really, really fast to you know, fine to like very angry. So in those situations, like, of course I will like protect my space. But basically like, because those are punishers, which means like it creates a very negative experience for the horse, I don't find them ethical in most application. So anyway, I'm rambling, but so that conversation between like negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, and then thinking about what also goes into that. So another reason I tend to find positive reinforcement training, like in practice, more ethical than other forms is because the trainers have most of them, not all of them, have like undergone this education where they've not only learned about learning theory and like modern views on animal ethics and animal training, they've also studied like equine ethology. So they know more about the horse as a species, like through research, not just through tradition and like, you know, what culture says about horses.
Said it's this way.
Yeah, exactly. They've also tend to focus on or prioritize other things in their training. Like, so I prioritize consent in my training. So consent doesn't really have like very directly anything to do with positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. Because as I said, like those things, like they're just terms and ways of describing how learning happens. So for me, like I prioritize consent, which brings into this whole other like set of principles to my training that make it more ethical, because I'm like aware of certain things and I'm looking for certain things in the training. So that's the thing too, is that like typically, and not always, and I know many negative reinforcement trainers who are very ethical in their practices with their horses, but from my perspective, it just tends to be for those two reasons, experience of the learner and then the kind of what the trainer is actually bringing to the situation. Yeah. And as you said, sorry, go ahead. I'm like, I'm
just agreeing with you. You're good. No, but you brought up this idea of consent, which I feel like flows really nicely with these ideas of the energies and whatnot that we're giving off and communicating with one another. But I'm kind of curious, and maybe, you know, I think some people, another one of those things you don't really have a concrete answer for, which is totally fine. I get it. I'm just kind of exploring the waters with you. But how do you look for consent with your horses and what you find there? Like, how do you know when a horse is consenting to something? How do you know when it's too far? And how do you, with things like, I don't know, worming and stuff like that, things that you know are maybe in their best interest, but you can't necessarily explain to them, how do you gain their consent for that type of thing?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with that. So in terms of like medical care and like necessities like that, it's best, of course, to try to train them to have a positive experience with anything they're going to encounter. So training a worming tube before you have to actually give them worming paste. There's a way to do that. Training for the farrier before the farrier actually comes, for dental work, like go on and on, injections, like blood drawing. Like you can work on all these behaviors ahead of time, and that will help create a more positive experience for them. But when it does come down to it, if like the horse needs the deworming medication, they need their blood drawn, and they're in the moment saying no, which I'll talk about how you see that in a second. That's a moment where it's like, I will make the call, like it's a have to, you know, it's a have to happen right now, and I'm going to override your consent. So I see it, I think the best way to think about it is kind of how we take care of children.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. Yeah. So like most good parents, like they want their child to have choice, and they want them to be participating in their experience, you know, their life experiences in a way where they feel like they have a bit of control and say on what's going on. But it's like when it's time to go to the doctor and get the shot, the kid doesn't want the shots, like the kid's getting the shot, you know?
Right.
So, and the same goes for our horses. I mean, we have to, you know, it's our responsibility to take care of them. So we do have to make those calls sometimes. But then, you know, my caveat to that is, you know, yeah, train for them, especially if you know your horse has like a very severe reaction to something, like either train for it or try to do everything you can so you don't have to do that thing. Or do it as like minimally as possible and like in the least stressful way for them as possible. So setting up the environment, and that's huge, like for me. So even thinking about like, if you know, like your horse has to have their blood drawn for a test or something, and they really don't like needles, like thinking about even the weather, like if it's going to be a really if you're having your vet out and it's going to be a really windy day, it's probably better to call the vet and reschedule, because that's like another stressor you're adding for the horse. So when you're choosing the things your horse has to have, they have to get done, like still thinking about their mental state and like trying to set up the environment in the best way possible. So they like, even in that bad experience, like it doesn't become such a bad experience that they like can't recover from it well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So yes, in those moments, like totally overriding consent, just like if I had a child in my care and they're like, I want to touch the burner on the stove, and I'd be like, no, not happening. You know? There's definitely, and then practically too. So there are kitty. Yeah. Cute. There are like, you know, like a lot of practical moments too, where we have to override our horse's consent. And I think this is where a lot of people really get stuck when they first start trying to incorporate this in their training. Like I know I did. So like grass is such a great example, because we all like know what that feels like to like have a horse like pulling us to the grass and like not coming up. So that was something I struggled with so much in the beginning, where I'm like, how do she's very clearly telling me what she wants to do, and she does not want to go back to her pasture and like not eat this luscious grass. So I'm like, I know what she's saying to me right now, but like I have to go to work, I have to, you know, like there's just real life stuff that we got to deal with as humans. And that's a moment where I will override my horse's consent and even use pressure and be like, no, I really have to put you back now. And again, like I do it in the best way possible. And like when I have tried, it's hard to teach a head up cue from the grass. But even when that doesn't work and I do have to use pressure because, you know, maybe I am on like a time constraint or something, I make sure to reward her, like a high value reward, like right after she comes off the grass. I give her a peppermint or something. So it's like I still use pressure, and that's not like, you know, direct positive reinforcement. It's like I'm still like trying to make the best situation for her. And then also it's like, if, you know, for me, it's like if I know I'm on a time crunch that day, then I'm not going to take her out like right next to the grass where I know she's going to be tempted and like want to eat that all day.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like if I know that I'm in a like having a time thing, I had to think about like every way I can make it so I don't have to tell her no, and that I don't have to use that pressure with her. And that means like I have to adjust a lot sometimes, you know, about the way that I relate to her, and my expectations have to be adjusted a lot. So that's kind of my attitude with that. Do you have any questions before I talk about how you find consent? Or
no, I'm really enjoying this. And
I'm like, I know it's an interview and I'm supposed to talk, but I'm also like,
well, I mean, if you need a minute to, you know, take some water or whatever, go ahead. I've listened to most of Adele, the Willing Equine's podcast and everything, so I'm kind of, you're really reiterating, and I know you work with her pretty closely, a lot of what she says, but I don't know, it's really interesting to hear it always from another perspective, how someone else incorporates it with their horse, because yeah, especially like the grass thing, like I'm in a situation right now where we don't have access to pasture. I'm in Ohio, it's winter, like we just don't have pasture, period. And so when Val does have like when I'm walking her or whatever, and there might be a little bit of grass or weeds or something growing, like she's really excited about that. Yeah, but sometimes, yeah, and there's always this thing of like, I need you to go back in your, in your pasture right now, which doesn't have grass, or whatever thing needs to happen. And so it's interesting. I love the idea of like swapping out for a high value reward and whatnot. I think that's really practical, because that's one thing I struggle with sometimes, is I feel like I love the advice and whatnot that gets shared on social media, but sometimes it doesn't feel particularly practical. Like, I want someone to tell me, like, when your horse does this, you can do this, and that will help. And so I appreciate that, because that's a great, like, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, totally. And it's hard, like when I was first starting this out and I was going through that problem of the grass, and I think I asked someone on social media or posted something about it, and I literally got a response. The person was like, why don't you just like dance around your horse until you get her attention and then lead her off, like instead of using pressure? And I was like, no. It's beautiful.
Wow, okay.
And wonderful when people are able to like go so far and that, and like we are all on a different place of the spectrum and in our journeys and what we're capable of based on like the moment and our understanding and in our environment. Like, because as you said, like it's winter, like there's certain restrictions because it's winter. But so it's hard to hear these sort of abstract ideas and then be like, okay, but this situation and this situation and this situation, how do I apply it?
Right.
And that it starts to get easier the more you learn. And just like the more you try and fail, like, but it also helps to have teachers. So like having a relationship like I have with Adela, she's my teacher, and being able to ask her questions. And there's, other people in the horse world. And then, people who come from a little bit slightly different perspectives. Like one of the first people I did a lesson with online was Terry Golson. She runs a blog called The Cooperative Horse.
Yeah.
She is someone who uses positive reinforcement, but is like, but not, all the time, and not like fully. And she's seemed like a very middle of the road person to me. And talking to her actually really helped me a lot, because I was able to describe, those specific situations and have someone who was a little more balanced than like the dancing, like in front of your horse person on Instagram. To work through with me, and it really helps. And I think, that's kind of the best thing we can do with those situations is like go to different people and like hear what they have to say about that specific situation. And then like for ourselves, be like, does this feel right? Does this feel right? Try it. If it doesn't work, like try something else. And the thing with consent too is that because it's a moving target, and it's like a process. It's like consent is a dialogue, because you can even think about like the way that we consent, like when we're, in a loving situation, like getting a little romantic or something. It's not like you tell the person like, yeah, I like the way you touched me there. And then you've consented to everything, right? It's as you're being intimate with that person, you're continually checking in with each other, about like what you like, what you don't like, you're consenting to, what you're not. It's a dialogue. And the same with other stuff too. So with our horses, it's like, in looking at consent, we have to see it as a dialogue, and it's something that's continually happening between both of us. But I will say, like in those situations when you know that you're going to have to deny your horse a lot of consent in one area, it really helps to give them a lot more in another. And that helps them create some resiliency. So the problem, like a hard thing is that when you first start giving your horse the opportunity to say no to things and practice their consent, like in the beginning, they'll say no a lot, like, and that's kind of hard for us.
Like a new favorite word. No.
Yeah, there's a lot of no's. I spent like an entire year just like Juno being like, I'm over here and you're over there. And I'm like, okay. So in that beginning period, like they're like reestablishing trust with us, and that like they're going to say no and that we're going to like hear it, so in that kind of like beginning phase, it is kind of like, I feel like a little more important to really, really try to set it up where you're not putting them in a situation where you have to override them. Because by doing that and like really giving them that time to rebuild trust with you in terms of consent, like you're creating resiliency in them. So like now when I have to say no to Juno about stuff, it's like not that big of a deal to her. It's not like she gets upset about it, or, and it's just not, and even for our relationship, it's like, it's not in the beginning, when I would first have to pull her from grass or something, I felt terrible. Like I felt awful about it. And it was like such a struggle. And now it's kind of like, she's like, oh, all right. And then, because of what I do is then I give her something else that she likes, and I give her another opportunity to do something that she wants to do.
Right.
So yeah, it's challenging and it's a moving target. But it's fun. Like it's fun to have that dialogue, you know, and it's fun to see what they choose and what they like. And it's fun to have them participate, you know, when they are really choosing to be with you and choosing to be engaged in the training. It's like such an amazing feeling. It's just, yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like we keep coming back to this idea of like a middle ground, like what you're saying with, when Juno kind of does, when you can't give Juno a choice or you can't give her consent, it's like, well, I can't do this, but I can do this. I can give you something else. And so it's this lovely middle path of, sometimes there are things that you just have to do. And I'm also going to make sure that you're comfortable and you're taken care of and you're enjoying yourself or whatever. And I really like that, because I know I've definitely gotten stuck in like mindsets of like, oh, I have to give my horse all the choice in the world, and then I end up just being, you know, dragged around by them or doing whatever. I'm like, this wasn't productive for either of us. Yeah. Or I have to be, you know, really scheduled and really intense and come out with an agenda and stick to the agenda, and then neither of us, again, we end up kind of with the same feeling. It's not productive, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable. And so finding this middle ground of how can my horse and I both be getting something out of this is so important. And really, yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. And you know, it's gonna look different for everybody and every horse. And also it's like, it's okay that some people aren't ready to do that, you know. It's a really, really hard thing to do, and like it does require you to let go of some of your goals and expectations. Like Juno has really severe anxiety, like separation anxiety from her herd. So I'm not really able to take her very far at all, like from her pasture. It's something we work on, but it's like a very long process type of thing. Right. So I could force her to leave, you know, because like, of course I want to go on trail rides. Like I want to go, you know, exploring up the property and stuff. But, so that was a really big expectation of our relationship that I had to let go of. Like I had to decide like, no, I really don't, it's not worth it to me to take her out. It's not even going to be fun to me if she's not okay with it and happy to.
So distracting.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I literally had to change what was rewarding to me. And I get that that's not, it's like, it's a very long process, and it's not, I don't know. I just respect when people are not there yet. And do push their horses past. And I think some horses do okay. Some horses do not, with that, but you know, it is so specific to the relationship. And that's why I would say too, like anyone who's interested in training like this, should really talk to someone else, because it's so hard to figure out on your own. Like I still have like plenty of moments where I'm not quite sure about what to do, or I have an experience where I'm like, I really don't know if I handled that the right way or how I feel about that. And then I talk to someone else about it. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Like, got it. All right. I'm going to do this differently next time. Or, oh, actually, like I was doing a pretty good job right there, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Having that outside opinion can be huge. Or even just having someone validating you and being like, you know, maybe that wasn't the best choice, but you didn't do any permanent harm. Your horse isn't traumatized because you yanked their head in the other direction or whatever.
Right.
It's really comforting. Because again, I think as trainers or whatever, however you want to, you know, whatever label you put on yourself in your interactions with your horse, I at least get stuck in this mindset of like, well, I'm the human, I know what I'm doing, therefore I have to make the right choice for her. And because I have logic or whatever, you know, I come up with that day. But the kind of the beautiful thing that I think we all really love about our horses is that they just are. So she just reacts to me and reacts to the world around her, whereas I'm thinking and calculating and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so having an outside voice to balance that is really a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, trust me, you're probably doing like way better than you think you are. Like, that's the thing with all of this. Like everyone who gets into this kind of training and who is this thoughtful about their horsemanship, like we're all very sensitive to how we're acting with them. And like, we want to do the right thing. And I think we really get trapped in our heads sometimes, and kind of like put our horses on a pedestal a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, too. Definitely.
And that's, you know, sometimes it's a good thing because they definitely like deserve a place up there because they're amazing, you know, but not to the point where we're feeling really bad about ourselves all the time. or we're making justifications that allow us to continue cycles with them that aren't healthy for either of us. So, yeah.
No, recognizing that is a huge step for a lot of people. And I wanted to just real quickly circle back to something you said earlier about you're talking about consent and as it relates to humans and everything, and obviously that's a hot topic and not entirely a different subject, but a different direction. But one thing that made me think about was this idea that consent is changing, and just because something was okay yesterday doesn't mean it's okay today, and kind of how we can apply that with our horses. That, you know, just because Juno said, yeah, sure, I don't want to graze anymore, I'll walk away and go over here with you on Monday, doesn't mean that on Tuesday you can just assume that that's the case.
Right.
Yeah, and so this idea of consent as a dynamic, progressive thing is really interesting to me. Like you train a behavior, or you train worming or whatever, and then you're like, all right, good, we never have to worry about worming ever again. But that's not the case. Like you said, it might be windy one day, the herd might be farther away than normal or whatever.
Completely. And you don't know what happened. I mean, we're in their lives for such a short period, like, of what their lives are. We don't know what's happened to them earlier that day, like. And which another reason consent is so important to me is because I really don't want to put my horse through pain. So really focusing on consent in our relationship, like, gives me a way to be more certain, because I can never be 100% certain, but more certain that I'm not putting her physically through pain. So, like, say you've trained you've gone through like this process of building consent in your relationship with your horse. And one day you go to the barn and you go to put the saddle blanket on, and your horse like says no. And like, we all know when they say no, like, and especially once you start really looking for it, you'll notice it. And also, like, I don't know if you read this one for the book club or read it on your own, but the Language, Signs, and Calming Signals book.
No, I haven't read that one yet, but it's been recommended by some.
So there actually like are signals that horses give too, where it's like not like a full blown no, but it's like kind of like you're being a little bit rude right now, like type of sign. So once we learn how to notice those and like our own specific horses, their kind of tells when they're saying no. So say you have your horse and you go to the barn, you go to put the saddle blanket on, they shy away, like that's a clear no. So, you know, if you're not really practicing, you could try again, like, and if they really, or try to change the environment, like, is it maybe like where they're standing? Are they just kind of nervous where they're standing and that's why they moved? Or, like, problem solve in the moment. But then if you try again and they still say no, like, for me, that's like, okay, we're not riding today, or I'm not gonna, no ridden work, like, saddle blanket, no ridden work. And to bring it back to like the physical issue, what I like about that is, I don't know, maybe my horse got kicked earlier that day,
right,
and is feeling sore. Maybe she tweaked something, when she was rolling. And so trying to give my horse like that authority over her own body and just trust it. And it could not be that. It could just be like, who knows what it could be, like it could be she's in season and it's like, bleh, or, so many different factors, or they just said no, because no, who knows what goes on in the horsey brain sometimes about why they choose things or not. So having that practice established is nice for me, because I know I can be fairly more certain that I'm not going to put my horse in a situation where she's hurting.
Yeah, that's great, because no one, as much as we can watch our horses and monitor them and read up on proper veterinary care and all that stuff, will never truly know what their body is feeling in any given moment and how they're feeling physically. And so this reminder that, and all these lovely intersections that I feel like are really popular online right now between femininity and horses, but giving, and we both have mares, so there's the added like her to that. But giving her the autonomy and the power over her own body to say, that doesn't feel good, that's not what I wanted, or whatever, is so powerful, both personally and then in your relationship. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, it's great. It is challenging though, because then, you might end up with a horse that says no, to like, doesn't want to be ridden ever.
Right.
And then what do you do? So it is challenging. But for me, my process that I've gone through is that, like, I just enjoy her saying yes so much. It barely matters what she's saying yes to, you know, like when she's really enthusiastic about something, like I get so much joy from that. And it's like, yes, totally. Someday I would love to be like back to trail riding, you know, and doing other kinds of training. And maybe another horse will come into my life that will want to do that too. Or maybe she'll want to start doing that again someday too. But right now that's not where we're at. And it wouldn't give me any pleasure to push her into it. So I've changed what's rewarding to me. And that's been really helpful in that process. Yeah, I mean, consent, it's like, it's such a huge topic, and it's like so new, like so new to horsemanship. Like a lot of this that I'm talking about is just stuff I've thought, like there isn't even like a ton to read yet, you know, on it, and specific for horses. So yeah, I mean, anyone thinking about this, it's like if you're getting very overwhelmed or like afraid, like it's totally, those are normal feelings. And, you know, like just keep calm. Like it's, you know, it's so great to learn about, but it's also like, we don't have to let ourselves get overwhelmed by like the scope of it because it is so new. Yeah.
So for those people who are kind of, you know, myself included, but just starting out, just kind of seeing what feels right, what doesn't feel right, maybe for them and their horse. What are some directions you'd point us in? Like, what are some things you tell, you know, like start with this or read this person's blog or that type of thing?
Oh yeah, specific resources. Well, definitely the language signs and calming signals book. So that book talks about the ways that horses, like through their behavior, show what kind of stress they're going through. And how they're feeling about things, and when they're going into like a sympathetic nervous system, which is like their nervous system for like the flight, fight or freeze,
right? Or
the parasympathetic nervous system, which like allows more normal activities. And they can only really learn when they're in the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's interesting too. But so that book's really good because that, and can also be overwhelming because like calming signals can be something as simple as like a horse blinking can be a calming signal. So you're just like, oh my God, like, but reading it was like totally eye-opening for me and was a huge help in thinking about like how I'm recognizing behavior in horses. Because I think if I had to say anything, like the number one thing to look at if you want to begin a journey into like consent-based training is to understand horse behavior better, and not behavior in terms of like outdated theories and ideas like dominance theory, but like current ethology. So Lucy Reese's work is also a really good place to go for that. Horses and Company was a book I read recently that is really good. And then get the calming signals. There's other stuff, but then also just like observing your horse. Like if you observe them and see how they interact with other horses and see kind of what their neutral is, and then just pay very much attention to like when you start to interact with them a little bit, like what changes in them, like do they shift their weight, like do they turn their head, like really listening to them and like having those moments where you're really reflecting on what they're doing and not trying to put a label to it, like, oh, she's being naughty today, or oh, he's just like, he's so lazy, you know, like not getting rid of those labels and really just like what is in front of you, like looking at it like data. What is the data in front of me? What's it saying? That would be kind of the first step, I think. Other than that, it's so big. I would say like the next thing to kind of do would be to think about the why. Like, why are you involved with horses? Why do you train the way you do? And really kind of try to unpack like your approach to horsemanship and notice and what, how you're applying science. So like what kind of learning theory quadrants you're applying in your training, and then any other kinds of methods or techniques, like really try to understand them and unpack that, and then look at your own goals and kind of like your why for doing it. Like, am I doing it because I want to win this medal, you know, or am I doing it because I really want a special bond with her? And then try to like dig into those goals, because like even saying like I want a special bond with my horse, like that's so vague and can mean so many different things to so many different people, and then is really going to depend on the horse, you know, a whole lot. So trying to dig into your own goals and desires and your reason for coming to the horse in the first place, I think is a really big deal in starting a consent-based practice, because you have to know why you're showing up at all, you know. And then learning kind of just the techniques for how to recognize consent, and then what to do when you're not getting it, and what to do when you are getting it. And that's kind of going to depend. Like for me, I think it's really difficult to use only negative reinforcement with a consent-based practice, just because, I mean, if you're just imagining like two different scenarios, like the trainer who's using all negative reinforcement, they like let their horse out loose in the arena, like totally loose, like, you know, and this horse is like not conditioned to like it being bad for them to get away from the person. Because like a lot of horses are like conditioned that if they try to leave, like they'll be punished for it. And so if they have a long history of that, then you can have a horse at liberty, and they're not at liberty, which I know you understand. But so you like have the horse loose in the arena, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna practice backing. And so you come up to the horse, and they're like, okay, hey, and then you ask them to back with pressure, and they're like, bye. You know, that's the difficult thing about using only negative reinforcement, because it is putting them in a state where like, I want to get away. It's hard for them to say yes to you when you're doing something that makes them want to say no. Kind of. And that's not all. And like, so that's why I find it difficult. I don't think it's like impossible to not have any consent in like a primary negative reinforcement based training. I think you can actually have a lot. But in the training situation itself, I see that it's kind of difficult as practicing it. Because I think you'll end up with a horse that like tells you no a lot more too. So then take the positive reinforcement perspective, where, you know, you have the horse turned out, you walk in, you're like, we're going to practice backing. So you walk up to the horse, give them a treat for like standing there when you walked up to them. Then you do your back cue, because you've trained a back cue, ask for the back cue, they back, you click, you reinforce. And you're like, okay, that was good. And you walk away. Like so often it's like, they're going to follow you. Like you have something they want, so they're going to re-engage. And for me, like using food, especially in training, is really wonderful for knowing consent. Because if you give your horse like some free like ad lib hay, and then you start training with food, if they come to train with you, like that is a very clear yes, you know, because like you're giving them the same resource that you're training with. It might be like slightly lower value, like, you know, it's like maybe that's Bermuda hay and you have alfalfa pellets. But still, if you're giving them a free food resource and they're coming to choose to be with you, that's like a very, very clear yes. So I can't remember what I was saying in the beginning of all of that, but just understanding like the like actual application of consent and how to navigate that in your relationship. And then and going through stuff like we were talking about the grass, like how to like deal with that situation, like learning about how to handle each of those situations. Like that would be the next step in applying consent in training. And that's obviously the hardest part, but that is the part. But because it's so variable, and there's just a lot to learn. And we can totally talk about, maybe another time, because I know we're like chatting for a while, but how you kind of can build it into your training more. But like at this point with Juno, for example, like she'll, in a training session, she'll be like training with me, and then she'll like kind of see something and like maybe wander off, and I'm like, okay, bye. And then like 2 minutes later, she comes back, she's like, okay, like ready for more. And she'll clearly show me too when she's like not done. Like there's been times when I've given her like end of session jackpot and like try to walk away, and she's like, nope, and like coming right with me like back into the little area we train in, you know, like it's so reinforcing for her. Like she wants to continue to do it. That's like such a big, wonderful yes.
You know you're paying for the right amount.
Yeah, totally. But if someone is engaged in like more traditional riding, like there are ways to practice more consent, not necessarily maybe in the training itself, but like, as we said, like in lots of like lifestyle options, you know, like, can you give your horse the option to go be in their stall or outside, like, and let them choose that? Can you let them choose who they're stalled next to, or who they're going to go out to turn out with, or, you know, there's just lots of ways that we can allow them to like have a little more freedom in their lives too. So
yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Go ahead. wrap up and everything because I don't want to take all of your time, and this is
Oh, it's totally fine.
I could totally turn this into like a 7-hour thing.
Yeah.
So you've given me a lot of really great information. I'm really, really appreciative of that. If anyone watching this wants to find you or get in touch with you, what's the best place to do that?
Yes. So MindHeartHorse on Instagram, you can DM me there or email me at mindhearthorse@gmail.com. I will have mindhearthorse.com like up pretty soon. It's not yet. So yeah, pretty soon I'll have services and blog and podcast stuff up there. But for now, it's just the Instagram. So catch me on the gram. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, yeah. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this. You were absolutely wonderful. Really great information, and definitely a lot for me personally to think about, especially with sending my horse forward to something versus pushing them away and different things like that. So I'm really very appreciative of your time.
Yeah.